I would like to share some thoughts about my experience as a digital activist or someone who is a part of civil society in Israel, and perhaps try to elaborate on some of the issues that were raised earlier today. So imagine, for instance, last week at one of the Israeli parliament committees, where around the table there were so many people. There were people from various agencies of Israeli government. It could be the Ministry of Justice, it could be the Ministry of Finance, it could be some segments of the Ministry of Justice. It could be the legal counseling of the committee itself. Lots of lawyers, as you can imagine. And then there was Jonathan Klinger, who was here before as a representative of the of Israel Digital Right Movement. And then there was Meital, who sits here as a representative of the Israeli Internet Society. And then there was me as a representative of the Israel Democracy Institute. And then there were the policy representative of the big platforms, let's say like Google or Facebook. And my question to you guys is, who were the activists among us? And I think it's a serious question, because sometimes even the policy managers for the platforms are activists, and sometimes we think quite similar. Sometimes there would be one representative of the Ministry of Justice who would object, I would say, the opinion of the others, and therefore become kind of an activist as for herself. So the question of what is exactly digital activism becomes an important issue. Is it lobbying? Is it referring only to questions of human rights? Does it have to do only with stuff that politicians wouldn't do just by themselves? Is it transferring academic knowledge into decision makers and improving the decision making process? Is it mediating knowledge? Is it pushing decision makers to do things, or maybe objecting policy or legislation recommendations? Is it trying to approach more, I would say, of a grassroots and educate the public? So there could be so many things, and I'm sure we could see the variety of aspects of being a digital activist during this day. So even though I wanted to put on the table a few aspects that I thought might be useful for the discussion, I think for a beginning, the biggest problem when dealing with technological activism, I would say, in contrast with other areas of activism, is the fact that there's a very severe phenomena of digital illiteracy among decision makers. Unfortunately, most of the decision makers are situated in the wrong side of the revolution, of the digital revolution. And even though they would tell you that they learn from their grandkids how to operate a cell phone, when it comes to understanding the nature of the revolution and the powers behind it and the dangers, sometimes, this illiteracy is really a major source for concern. One of the reasons for this digital illiteracy is traditional I would say, mediation of technological issues, which sometimes could be divided into, I would say, a schizophrenic kind of a map. It's either everything is going to be amazing, we're all going to be cyborgs, and we're going to live forever, and we're going to solve all the problems that are unsolvable today, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, it's robots are going to come and kill us all, and nothing's going to be left out. And you can't really approach, I would say, rationally a policy issue if you mediate it in such a way. So that's another thing. Also, I think, especially in the Israeli parliament, but I'm sure it's true in other countries as well, and it was mentioned here before, our at least parliament members are very busy people. They don't have enough support. They don't get enough, I would say, help with data, with information, with background, and therefore they make decisions that are not, I would say, based on a good factual basis. For instance, I sat in, I would say, serious discussions where people actually talked about the question whether your cell phone records you or not, and people said very responsibly and very convincingly that Facebook is recording you at every step on the way. And I said to them, how do you know that? Has it been proven? Nothing. Don't need to be proved. Yeah, my friend told me. I heard it. My kid told me, and so on and so forth. So that's another issue. I think another point I want to raise is the lack of interdisciplinary discussion or contact. And it is true in the academic world as well, where people from computer sciences don't talk to people from public policy. But think about decision makers; they don't talk to anyone, and this is something we need to remember. Also, sometimes the ideas of how to regulate technology don't come, I would say, from the inner or the core issues, but rather from all different study cases or even actual cases. And you know that bad cases make bad laws. And sometimes they hear about bullying in a classroom. Also, like this a phrase, public shaming, which is very common in Israel. I haven't heard it anywhere else in the world. I mean, this is also something that we've made up. Not that it's not existing, except that it's being called bullying. So, which is interesting. But think about shaming issues. It's enough that, let's say, one school kid would commit suicide, and our politicians would like to shut the internet down. And sometimes they don't even stop for a second to ask whether the regulatory or the legal tools that they're recommending or want to or want to adopt are actually the right ones. And by that I mean the ability to divide or to separate phenomena that could actually be dealt with by regulatory tools and stuff which is more, I would say, behavioral and needs some more cultural adaptation. When we talk about online disinhibition effect, which is the phenomena where people would say to the machine stuff that they would never say in a face-to-face conversation. When we talk about addictions or addictive applications and what to do with them. When we talk about the anxieties or depressions caused by using social media. When we talk about phobias and fear that might be that we might see during the next couple of years due to the feeling that we are surrounded by machines or by sensors all around us. All those things are not necessarily things that can be solved by regulatory tools. So I'm sure I haven't even touched half of the important issues that are challenges of decision makers, but I want to say a few words about what activism could be, or in what sense activism could be helpful. So I think the first thing is mediating knowledge into the decision-making process. This is the most important thing, trying to close the gap between where technology is and where their understanding or knowledge is. And here, there are different types of knowledge that our decision makers need. Some of it, I would say, is a more general background of the political economy of the revolution. Some of it is reviews on specific issues. Sometimes it's data, it's statistics, or any other data that could help. Some futurism, which is not too extreme, could be very helpful. But here I want to say something, and I really hope you're not going to be too mad at me. from what I've seen is that sometimes activism and social and civil society groups mediate, I would say, I'm not saying biased, but unprofessional knowledge. It's people who don't really understand, or people who don't see the bigger picture. And I have to admit, we've seen it today as well. When people, for instance, talk about privacy issues, and they don't take into account that there's a whole lot of literature about classic privacy, about the relationship of traditional media and privacy, and they think that those issues were, we as a society face them only for the first time. I think it's a problem, because it makes the picture that is being presented to decision makers very one-sided or biased. Also, we need to be responsible in defining what exactly we want to promote, or what exactly we want to defend, where exactly the problems are. And this is, again, our responsibility as civil society organizations. We also, I think, need to learn, which is difficult. It demands a lot of modesty. We need to learn to work in a network. As I see it, for instance, in the digital activism scene in Israel, some of the organizations are more, I would say, technological, in the sense that they can program stuff and for instance, make data more accessible. Some of them are half or semi-academic, such as the Israel Democracy Institute. And then again, our responsibility is to be very, very, I would say, sincere in our academic policy recommendations. Some other organizations do more grassroots, which is also a very, very important thing. So just to sum up, I want to very quickly touch upon a few, I think, important issues that needs to be addressed by digital activism, especially in Israel. For instance, for starters, I would say privacy. Privacy, I think, is the queen of the digital rights is the queen of human rights in the digital world. And we talk here about, for instance, pushing the government to legislate a better privacy bill, because Sharon was talking so nicely about the GDPR, but hasn't even mentioned the fact that the Israeli government hasn't updated its privacy bill for many, many years, which is a huge problem, I think, for us. So it's privacy as a personal control right. It could be privacy as a more collective right, which has to do, for instance, with constitutional thought and constitutional commentary on this right. But also we need to find out whether we want to address the question of privacy against the state, against government, against the biggest platforms. Who is exactly our enemy here? Which is, again, something which could be quite tricky sometimes, because the biggest platforms are my best allies when it comes to fight government breaches of privacy. But then when it comes to Cambridge Analytica style, and when we try to amend the Israeli propaganda bill so that we would make sure a Cambridge Analytica would not happen here during the next election, it becomes a little bit more tricky. And also, when we talk about privacy, I think that we don't hear enough the voice of grassroots, of education in Israel in terms of privacy. It's I would say the role of the government as well as the role of other civil society organizations. So that's, I would say, the first thing. The second thing I want to mention, and people were talking about artificial intelligence here. The next revolution, or this the present revolution is the artificial intelligence or machine learning revolution, and it hardly happens that within 20 years two such major revolutions happen. And for me, learning from what we've missed in the connectivity or the internet revolution in terms of finding the right time to get involved and to regulate, anticipating well the problems and the opportunities and the dangers, all those things that sometimes we've missed, we can learn the lesson and think today about the next, let's say, decade when it comes to artificial intelligence. And I think the main issue here is the black boxes issue, is the question of transparency of the way those machines actually conduct or create their learning process, and being able to monitor it in real time, or at least do some kind of a reverse engineering of this process. And the reason for that is that once the government adopt a lot of those platforms and systems, artificial intelligence systems, such as let's say crime forecasting system and so on and so forth, this is going to be the major issue of human rights in our society. And I think our ability, so I wanted to say just one more thing in this, with this respect, the ability of civil society organizations, unlike the academic world, is that we are not tied, I would say, in the level of professionalism that is demanded from an academic, from a pure academic work. Therefore, we can bring forward policy issues before the academia has actually started researching them well. We can start thinking about them. We can start making a public discussion about them. And this is, again, I think one of the roles of public activism. So there are going to be very different, I would say, networks and cooperations between various sorts of activists and activism groups. I think the most important thing, as I mentioned before, is the ability to work in the network and to understand that we do complete with each other, even though sometimes, and then again, we need to remember that we sometimes fight on the same, I would say, pool of resources in order to survive. I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you, guys.